Some weapons exist only in the hands of the privileged, divine weapons. These are the physical manifestations of a person's soul, granting their wielders unique and powerful abilities. One noble family, famed for having once defeated the evil god known as the Catastrophe Dutch, has possessed these weapons for generations. From birth, its members are blessed, bodies built for battle, unparalleled talent, and divine weapons of incredible power. The protagonist was born into this family, dreaming of one day becoming a great hero, proudly wielding his own divine weapon. At least, that was the plan. But everything changed during the oracle ceremony, the sacred rite where one's divine weapon is supposed to appear. For the first time in the family's history, someone, him, failed to receive one. He was labeled a failure, a disgrace, and treated as an outcast. From that moment on, he faced constant humiliation. Zane, the family's second son, was especially cruel. To him, someone without a divine weapon didn't deserve to be part of their world. He took pleasure in tormenting the protagonist, often under the guise of delivering unintentional beatings that he mockingly called facial massages. Jessica and Sarah were present during one such incident. Jessica watched with amusement, clearly enjoying the display. Sarah, however, was troubled. She tried to intervene, but Jessica tripped her, sending her to the ground. Sarah had only been summoned to watch, a warning of what happens to the weak. Interference wasn't allowed. Seeing Jessica step on Sarah's head filled him with dread, but he was still caught in Zane's cruel massage session. Zane mocked them both, calling them filthy hybrids, a term used to insult children of concubines. These children were often targets of abuse, labeled mutts and treated as lesser beings. After the beating, the protagonist apologized to Sarah, ashamed that he couldn't protect her. But with a smile, she told him not to worry. She had promised to always stand by his side. Still, he didn't want things to stay this way. He swore to grow stronger, even without a divine weapon. He vowed to protect her with his own life. They embraced, and she thanked him for making that promise. Even if he couldn't live like the rest, he would find his own way to fight. He intended to keep his promise, but just days later, he was banished from the family. Grief overwhelmed him, soon followed by fury. He knew that without his presence, Sarah would become a target. He had to get stronger, strong enough to return and take her away from that place. Normal weapons were useless against knights who wielded divine ones. If he couldn't match them with talent or bloodline, then he would surpass them with sheer determination. He had no other choice. In a small shop, he placed a heavy bag of gold on the counter and declared he would take one weapon of each type. The shopkeeper was stunned. It looked like the boy was preparing for war. 2 years passed. He journeyed alone, horseback his only companion. Though still without a divine weapon, he had trained relentlessly. Monsters stood before him now, dangerous and many. But he had mastered countless weapons and was eager to put his skills to the test. Among his arsenal, he even carried a firearm, perfect for collecting debts or dealing with thugs. The monsters didn't stand a chance. As the battle ended, a hooded man observed from the shadows. At last, he stepped forward, intrigued. He asked if the boy always carried that many weapons, especially for someone who lacked a divine one. The boy found his words strange, like the ramblings of a lunatic. Then the man raised his hand, summoning a brilliant blue light. A surge of energy fired toward the ground, striking with power. The boy stepped back, astonished. What now stood before him looked like a weapon, but it wasn't a sword. It was a sheath. It was the divine sheath of Avalon, a relic capable of storing and transferring divine weapons from one wielder to another. It contained the legacy of the 5 greatest warriors in history. Whoever could master Avalon would wield the mightiest armaments on the planet. The boy accepted the gift. From that day on, he dedicated himself to mastering the sheath. 3 years later, now under the guidance of his mentor, he faced a skyborn dragon roaring with fury, fire welling in its throat. But he stood unfazed. He summoned Avalon, and the white sheath shimmered in his hand. Focused, he called forth its power. A radiant glow erupted, and from the sheath emerged the windshield of Killis, a powerful defensive relic capable of shielding him from the dragon's flames. Then came his counterattack. From Avalon, he drew the Stormhammer Magina and launched himself at the beast. With a single crushing blow, he drove the hammer into the dragon's skull, defeating it instantly. His mentor declared the training complete. He had mastered Avalon. "You can go to your sister now," the mentor said. "Not even an S-rank paladin can stop you." Joy filled the boy's heart. 5 years had passed since his exile. Finally, he He had the strength to rescue her. He hoped she was still safe. But when he reached the region, he was greeted by destruction. Fire consumed everything. Banners flew above the carnage, Roth Windsor. A civil war. It was worse than he feared. He stormed into the castle, hoping, praying. But inside the hall lay a body, blooded and broken. His heart sank. It was Sarah. He held her tightly, trembling. She didn't respond. He had failed her. His promise meant nothing now. A scream tore from his throat. In that moment of anguish, a bolt of energy pierced his chest. A warrior stood before him, surrounded by a sinister aura. The man recognized him, Bell. But how? That no longer mattered. He was going to die, just like his sister. The warrior raised his weapon for a final strike. Too weakened to fight, the boy collapsed, his chest pierced once more. And then, he opened his eyes. He was in the cathedral. The stained glass windows were familiar. The ceremony was beginning again. Somehow, he had returned to the past. The priest instructed him to visualize his divine weapon. Last time, he had none. He expected the same failure again. But this time, something changed. Before him stood Avalon. This time, he would change everything. With the divine sheath in his hands, he vowed to rewrite fate. Even the priest was shocked, never having seen such a thing. Before the priest could comment, the boy smiled. "Don't worry," he said confidently. "This is the greatest divine weapon in existence." He rushed through the castle halls, searching for Sarah. She was alive in this timeline. He knew it. When he opened her door, she turned from the window and smiled, surprised by his sudden visit. She welcomed him with open arms. He embraced her tightly, unable to hold back tears. Sarah noticed the hug was too tight, but she didn't mind. She was happy. Seeing his tears, she gently comforted him. "It's okay," she whispered. "We have each other." Just then, Zane, his obnoxious half-brother, barged in. The boy had always despised Bell. Now, hearing that he'd received a sheath as a divine item, he laughed cruelly. "A sheath? How fitting. You'll never win with that." The protagonist clenched his fist, tempted to rearrange the little jerk's teeth. Instead, he gave Zane one chance to take it back. But Zane mocked him further. That was his mistake. The protagonist struck Zane square in the gut. The boy crumpled, gasping for air. "Threaten Sarah again," he warned, "and you'll need another lesson in manners." Zane, red with fury, summoned his divine weapon, swearing to burn Bell's skin off. He was an E-rank paladin, after all. Paladins were ranked by strength. F rank at initiation. E rank came after mana integration. D rank and above could use special attacks. B rank required mastery of their weapon's unique abilities. Bragging about E rank was pathetic. The protagonist smiled. "You're cute when you're angry." That was the last straw. Zane attacked, but it was too late. Bell summoned Caliber, the Sword of Light, from Avalon. Its radiant blade outshone Zane's fire. The clash was swift and decisive. Caliber cut clean through Zane's divine weapon. He fell back, horrified. "You tricked me." Zane stammered. "You were armed." Bell stepped forward. "Satisfied? Or would you like to beg now?" Cornered, Zane muttered cowardly threats. But it didn't matter anymore. Then, in a panic and with his underwear completely destroyed, he fled the room. But the protagonist wasn't finished. He followed closely, now wielding a fire-spitting lead dispenser, Ragnarok. Taking aim with a twitch of the wrist, he fired a single round. The terrified boy dodged just in time, the bullet slamming into the wall near his face. Staring at the bullet hole, the boy's fear deepened. None of it made sense. Moments ago, the protagonist had a sword. How could he now be using a gun? It was supposed to be impossible to have more than one divine weapon. The protagonist warned him, never provoke Sierra again. What happened next was up to him, but he'd better remember this moment. And since his underwear had already reached its limit, there was nothing left to ruin. With cold, calculating eyes, like a debt collector with a grudge, the protagonist made it clear, if the boy kept pushing, the next hole would be in his forehead. In full panic, the boy ran to save his skin. Meanwhile, the protagonist holstered his divine weapon. Sarah had seen everything. She was safe but in awe. She asked if those weapons were her brother's divine armament. He reminded her gently that she could trust him to handle everything. To her, that was cool beyond words. All he wanted was to keep protecting that precious smile. He swore he would never lose anyone again. Elsewhere, the frightened boy ran straight to his father, the Duke. He cried that he had been humiliated like a dog. The Duke was intrigued. Multiple divine weapons? That wasn't normal. The boy insisted that Bel must have made a pact with Beelzebub the lone shark. For that, he should be banished. But the Duke didn't listen. His mind was too occupied with the idea of a powerful heir. Rising from his throne, he ignored the whining boy. When asked where he was going, the Duke simply said he was going to see Bel himself. He needed to know the truth. After that encounter, Bel returned to his room to rest. He had won the battle, but he was still trapped in a child's body, exhausted, with limited control over his mana. That shot should have been a fire burst but ended up just a regular bullet. He still had a long way to go. As he recovered, his mind wandered back to the battle. That emblem. Roth Windsor. An old rival family. The one who attacked him must have been from them. This time, though, things would be different. He would protect his sister. To do that, he needed more respect within his own family. The door swung open. Bel looked up and saw his father, Galleon. It had been a long time. Known as the Singer of the Sword, Galleon had once stood alone against an evil god, carving a path through the dark continent with nothing but his blade. Standing beside him now was the whining boy, his older brother. Bel understood the purpose of this visit. He was being accused. But that was fine. This was his opportunity. If the Duke noticed him, he could finally gain recognition. Bowing respectfully, Bel addressed the Duke. The old man noted how much he had changed. But this time, he came not just as Duke, but as a father. Bel, however, responded with seriousness. In front of the Duke, even a single word could be misinterpreted. He needed to act responsibly. The Duke was impressed by his son's maturity. He asked Bel to stand, agreeing to speak with him as Duke. The atmosphere immediately grew tense. The Duke's pressure was immense. He acknowledged that there had been a fight between his sons, which was strictly forbidden. Bel showed remorse. The older brother, however, grinned, expecting Bel to be punished. But Bel stood firm. He said both he and his sister had been harassed. The Duke asked if this meant his orders had been ignored for childish reasons. Bel affirmed it and added he had no regrets. When asked again, Bel declared that abandoning loved ones would be the true disgrace for a paladin. Even if it meant going against his brother, he would protect his sister. The Duke studied him. This was the path of the knight Bel wanted to walk. The Duke drew his sword, asking what Bel would do if he were the opponent. Without flinching, Bel replied, he wouldn't hesitate. Even if it meant fighting the Duke himself. Rather than being angered, the Duke admired his courage. He decided to let the matter drop, much to the older brother's disappointment. Then, turning to him, the Duke condemned Zane for harassing his sister and then losing the fight. He told him to feel ashamed, and to not show his face again. He turned back to Bel, recognizing his bravery in speaking out, fully aware of the consequences. Bel apologized for his recklessness, but the Duke said this was exactly the resolve expected of a catastrophe knight. Then, the Duke asked to see Bel's divine armament. Bel obliged. A blue light emerged between his hands, Avalon, the sheath of legends. The Duke was stunned. Avalon was said to house the spirit of the original paladin, wielded by the greatest heroes in history. Bel confirmed that he had used both a sword and a firearm, and revealed that both weapons were stored within Avalon. The Duke was speechless. Even more shocking, Bel revealed that he could wield only 2 at a time, but 5 weapons resided in Avalon. The Duke was convinced. His son was destined for greatness. He declared he had no use for the weak, but now he would have high expectations for Bel's future. As he left, he encouraged Bel to keep working hard.